Today on the Bourbon Bytes podcast, Heaven Hill is back with a new Parker's Heritage release. A. Smith Bowman Distillery explores Hungarian oak. One of the biggest names in gaming has something to say about the modern video game industry. Plus, I review one of the new Cask Strength Knob Creek Single Barrel picks at 128 proof. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Bourbon Bytes podcast, a whiskey podcast with a gaming twist. I'm your host, Clifton, and this is the week of Thursday, August 7th, 2025. And if you're following the channel, you realize that I am not doing a live stream this week because I am taking a trip up to Seattle with one of my best friends from high school and even before that, Boy Scouts. And we're going to go see a concert. We're going to go tour the city. We're going to maybe drive out to one of the national parks. So it should be a really good time, but I will not be live. But I want to get this podcast out because there is some news and reviews I wanted to get out in front of you guys. Some of which I am very, very excited about and hope I get a chance to try. This first one's coming to us from Bardstown, Kentucky. This was just announced earlier this week. This is the new 2025 Parker's Heritage Collection release from Heaven Hill. So this one is a bit different than any of the ones I've seen recently. So this is actually a blend of 3 different mash bills. The minimum age is 11 years old, but they're considering it an American whiskey because the culmination of all 3 of these. So listen, this has a 15-year-old Kentucky straight wheated bourbon, an 11-year-old Kentucky straight corn whiskey, and a 12-year-old whiskey aged in rickhouse rye made exclusively from rye and malt. So this is essentially a 4-grain American whiskey made up of 3 different mash bills, and I am very, very interested in finding out why. So it says that this mash bill was aged in unique rickhouses and floors and then married together post-aging. It is being bottled at barrel proof, which is 122.5 proof, non-chill filtered, of course, as with all other Parker's Heritage releases, and it will be available beginning in September for a suggested retail price of $179.99. I've, for the most part, been a huge fan of the Parker's Heritage series. There have been a few misses in the releases that I've seen. This one, I have mixed feelings on. One, I do love a 4-grain, but I am interested in seeing why they chose to combine these 3 very, very different mash bills. And was it always the plan, or are we combining 3 failed individual projects? Maybe it's just me, but when I first read the press release, I'm like, oh, all 3 of these sound like really cool products, but why are they being blended into a Parker's Heritage where we can't really taste them individually? I mean, an 11-year-old straight corn whiskey from Heaven Hill at Cask Strength would be amazing. I would love to try that. I know they had the older one that was, I think it was the 19-year corn whiskey they had as a special release a couple years ago. So like that in itself is interesting enough. A 15-year-old wheated bourbon from Heaven Hill sounds incredible. And then a custom mash bill, like they're just calling it an American whiskey, of just rye and malt. Maybe not as exciting as the first 2, but like I would be interested in trying it. So why are we combining 3 really cool, unique ideas that have never really been done before at Heaven Hill, at least to my knowledge, and blending them together to make a batched product? I don't know. I guess maybe it's just the pessimist in me. I'm starting to say like, maybe these were all just failed experiments. They just didn't taste good on their own. So they're like, let's blend them together and see what happens. I don't want to think like that. I would love to think that this was intentional, that this was always the plan all along. But it does make me very, very curious. I do want to try it, as with every Parker's Heritage release. You know, it's definitely a try before you buy situation. Now, a reminder, Parker's Heritage Collection, they honor Parker Beam and his legacy in expanding the boundaries of American whiskey. It says this 19th edition is a celebration of innovation and craftsmanship, bringing together 3 mash bills and age statements to create a complex, bold whiskey that truly stands out. And with other releases, this is going to support ALS. They've raised more than $1.4 million since the start back in 2013. And it's gone towards ALS research and patient care. So it all goes to a good cause. I just feel like this release is kind of interesting. I almost would have rather them release all 3 of these separately and then maybe had a special release with them all together. I can't even imagine how this thing tastes. I definitely won't be blind buying this one, especially at that price. You know, $179.99. It's not a bad price for a limited edition bourbon. I've paid much more than that, but I usually, with Parker's Heritage, I've at least tried it first or have just heard amazing, incredible things. So This one's one that I'm going to wait a little bit around to see if some people have some reviews of it. Maybe Heaven Hill will find me lucky enough to have a sample for review. If so, you guys will be the first to hear. But based on the description, I'm intrigued. I just don't feel like I am willing to just blind buy this one. It just sounds too strange. And it doesn't mean it's going to be bad, but it's definitely an interesting combination of 3 different mash bills. So curious, have you guys seen this on the shelves yet? Have you heard any reviews? Let me know. I'm curious because I haven't seen anyone talk about this yet. Like I said, it was just announced this week. But yeah, that's definitely one that I would definitely be trying before I buy, is how I feel about it. Now, in other news, there is another new release that was just announced earlier this week as well. This is the A. Smith Bowman Distillery. They are releasing another experimental oak series release, this time with Hungarian oak. Now, this is the 3rd release in the series that is exploring oak varietals, and this is going to be available via an online lottery running from August 11th through August 18th, 2025. And you can find all the details about that lottery on their website, asmithbowman.com/spirits. There's a little banner right now up at top that you can see how to enter to win that. But this release sounds really, really cool. So I have a picture of it here. It is a Virginia limited edition whiskey is how they label it. They say that the Abraham Bowman Oak Series was about challenging everything we thought we knew about aging whiskey, says their head distiller, David Bach. This experiment started more than 14 years ago with former master distiller Truman Cox. French oak and American oak dazzled us with impressive flavors, and now Hungarian oak has delivered another delicious and unexpected whiskey. In many ways, all positive, Hungarian oak is the opposite of what we thought we would expect from an extended age whiskey. Now, this is a blend of whiskeys aged for 12 years in charred Hungarian oak barrels. It's bottled at 115 proof. Now, it's interesting that it's being described as a bourbon on the tasting notes. I'm seeing that on the press release as well. They say this bourbon has a brown velvet color, but nothing else in this press release mentions that it's a bourbon. We're not seeing anything about the mash bill. We're seeing it described as an experimental whiskey and unexpected whiskey, but nothing about mash bill whatsoever. So at least we have that to go off of. At least it claims to be a bourbon in one line of this press release. The label doesn't call it a bourbon. It just says it's a Virginia whiskey. So take that with a grain of salt. It could just be a typo on the press release. And it's also on their website too. That's definitely interesting. I'm very excited to see it out in the world. I'd love a chance to try it. Now, with it being a lottery release, I'm probably never going to see the light of day of this bottle. But if you guys get a chance to try it, let me know. Is it a bourbon? Does it taste like a bourbon, or is it completely different? Very, very curious. Now, interestingly enough, our last piece of news does not come from the world of whiskey, but the Bytes part of the Bourbon Bytes podcast. This is actually a gaming-related article, and it's an actual interview with Hideo Kojima, who is one of the biggest names in storytelling and video game history, especially with Japanese video games. He's known for creating the Metal Gear franchise and more recently the Death Stranding series. But he has some thoughts about the current state of the video game industry, and I find it hard to disagree. So he's speaking out in this recent article from Essence magazine, not Essence like normal, but SSENSE.com. But they did an interview with him towards the end of last month, and he says that he is disappointed with the state of the video game industry. And this is a feeling that I feel like has been talked about, but hearing it from a big name who is so quintessential in video game making, it kind of solidifies the facts that a lot of us consumers have been saying over and over again. For example, he thinks that most interesting work is actually happening with indie games, while big budget studios are churning out things that are safe and tremendously boring. Now, those are his words. And it makes you think, a lot of games we're seeing sequels or, follow-up spin-off releases of other games. And as much as I do appreciate a good franchise, I do have to agree the games that I've really found to be falling in love with lately have been indie games. I mean, we just played Split Fiction, which is from the creators of It Takes Two, and it's such a fun, innovative game. I mean, the world building, the storytelling, the characters are so dynamic and involved. And I feel like a lot of time, like the big name game studios, they're kind of rehashing the same thing over and over again. Like, there's a lot of military games that all kind of have the same formula. He actually has a quote in this article saying like he doubts that any of them have actually put together a gun in real life. And then when they countered the question to him, he's like, yeah, and I actually know lots of ways to kill people, but he didn't elaborate on that part, which is kind of hilarious, honestly. And it comes at an interesting time because Konami, which is the company that he, was involved with, is actually going to release Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater, but a remake version of it. But they didn't involve him at all in the process. So they asked him if he was going to play it, and he laughed and said, "No, I won't." So it makes total sense why he would have this feeling when he is responsible for creating such an interesting IP, not just with Metal Gear Solid, but Death Stranding as well. I mean, that is very much a film-like experience. Apparently, he's a huge film buff, which is amazing. He often puts commentary on social media of like movies he's enjoying and taking selfies with different actors and things like that. So he's a big film lover, and you can just see the cinematography in the Death Stranding games. I mean, it is, the worlds are so dynamic. The characters' facial expressions are so, human-like. I think that's what makes it special. He brings the emotion to the characters. I think a lot of time these big studios care more about people playing online and, getting as many players as they can, cashing in on DLC and things like that. They're really losing the true storytelling element that made video games what they are. For me personally, I will be way more interested in buying an indie game, especially when it's a unique concept, than I ever would be in, picking up the 7th edition of Call of Duty or, whatever like that. I mean, now, that being said, y'all know I love Grand Theft Auto and that series, but I think Rockstar is one of the exceptions to the rule because they take so long on their games. They're not releasing a new game every year or every 6 months. They're really taking their time to build a new world for their characters. So I know maybe I'm a little bit biased because I do love Rockstar, but I think, when it comes to video games in general, there's very few big names in the industry that take things that seriously and their craft so seriously. And we're seeing it way more with indie game developers. So I 100% support, indie developers of games. I used to have a segment on the podcast, or maybe it was live streams. It's been a couple years, but I would highlight different indie games and I would play them on Twitch and kind of talk about like the stories of making them. So I might bring that back. I do love a good, underrated game or a game that's kind of, slowly working its way up the charts. I'd love to try it out and review it on the channel. So you guys make sure to follow me on Twitch at Bourbon Bytes. Haven't been live. I went live a couple days ago to play this game called Peak, which is a multiplayer game. I've been playing the past few nights with Steven and Fred from my bike club. Been a ton of fun, but and then itself there's a new game coming from that developer too, and it's like blowing up. So yeah, I mean I think it's not a new story to hear someone feel this way about the industry, feeling like it's going a bit stale, but to hear it from such an iconic person in the industry maybe has more levity to it. And I'm hoping that game developers or the industry in general take something from this interview. So I really enjoyed reading it. I'll link to it down in the description of this episode. Just such a mastermind behind video game creation and storytelling. Huge fan of Hideo Kojima, so definitely check it out. All right, well, that does it for news this week. Thank you for humoring my gaming news here as well. We do have one more thing before we get into our whiskey review, and it is a new segment of the podcast where I'm going to answer you guys' questions from your phone calls or text messages. Yes, I open up a phone number specifically for this podcast. I'd done it previously on the last version, like season 1 of the podcast, but I decided to reopen it because I think it would be fun to have you guys call in and leave some questions. If you are curious about doing that, you can call me at 916-642-9837, or easier to remember, 916-64-BYTES, B-Y-T-E-S. Of course, I had to find a Bourbon Bytes related phone number here. But we do have our first caller who submitted a question for this week's podcast. So let's go ahead and play that.
Hi, Cliffy. So the first question I have is, what new or limited releases are you looking forward to most for the back half of 2025, either gaming or whiskey related? Thanks. Bye.
All right. Well, if you didn't recognize that voice, that is our one and only M. She is one of our bourbon wrenches here on the channel. She is incredible. She's been a guest on the podcast before. Thank you, Emily, for your question. I'm excited to answer both versions of the question, both whiskey and video games. But let's talk whiskey first. This was a great time to ask this question because I actually got one of the bottles that I've been looking for this year. It's going to be what I'm reviewing this podcast episode, actually. So if you saw the title and everything, this is the new Cask Strength Single Barrel Select from Knob Creek. I am very, very excited to get my hands on the first that I've ever seen of the Knob Creek Cask Strength releases. And at 128 proof, I'm really, really excited to dive into this. So we'll get into that in just a second, but I do want to mention in terms of gaming, that's also a great question. Originally, it was obviously Grand Theft Auto 6, but that got pushed to May of next year. So I had to take another look and think back at what games I am excited for. And I saw one pop up on the list that's actually coming out on the 8th. So basically the day after you guys listen to this podcast. It's called Mafia: The Old Country. As someone that really didn't grow up playing the Mafia games, but was aware of them I think they were from PS2 and PS3, I recently got a combo pack of them on Steam. And I've just started replaying them. And they really hold such replay value, even now. These are older releases, but they are open world games, which you guys know I'm a huge fan of. That's why I'm a big fan of the Grand Theft Auto series. But they're very specifically focused on like mafia, mob, crime families. I love seeing some variety in the open world genre of video games. Now, I don't know too much about this new release. I don't know. I assume it says it's a prequel to the first game. So I assume we're going to be going back into the past to the 1940s, kind of like the Mafia 1 and Mafia 2 releases, but in like the new gen of graphics and everything like that. I'm super excited to see how this comes out. But it says that the premise of this game is it's going to be based during the 1900s in the fictional town of San Celeste, which was previously featured in Mafia 2. It's going to be set in like a Sicily, Italy kind of vibe. It's based on the origins of the Sicilian Mafia. The narrative follows Enzo Favara, who journeys from a childhood of indentured labor into Sicily's sulfur mines, and then joining a crime family. So, like I said, I'm very, very excited to see more about this. I'm sure there's a trailer that I haven't watched yet, but that's definitely one of the most anticipated games other than Grand Theft Auto I'm looking forward to this year. So you may catch me on Twitch streaming this game soon. I'm going to be out of town this weekend, but I'm going to definitely pick it up shortly after release. So thank you, Emily, for the question. I appreciate you guys reaching out and asking something that you're interested in. You guys feel free to give me a call. Like, I will take calls at any time, and I will include them on future episodes. A reminder, the phone number is 916-642-9837 or 916-64-BYTES. Whatever's easiest for you to remember. But call in, leave me a message. I'd love to talk more to you guys and feature you guys on the show. So cheers to that. But we're not done here. We're going to go into our bite-sized review. All right, well, as I teased earlier, this week I am reviewing the new Cask Strength Single Barrel Select from Knob Creek. Now, this is an upgrade to their standard Knob Creek Single Barrel Select program. These releases aren't coming in at the standard 120 proof. They're actually being bottled at cask strength, which is a first for the brand. The only time I've seen it was with that release that came out for travel that I reviewed earlier this year. But this one is a single barrel select from K&L Wine and Spirits, which is my local liquor store. This one's called Fifth Floor X Magic C. And they have a little bit of info about it here on their website. So let me go ahead and get this poured, and then I'll read a little bit about it. Now, this was part of actually 3 different picks that they did. So they had a Magic A, Magic B, and Magic C. They're all different proof, but they're all from the 5th floor of this rick house. And the 5th floor is one of the higher floors. They say that this is really saturated, and it's the maximum amount of possible flavor for the time that they've been aged. So both of these are just under 10 years old. They're bottled at 9 years, just a few months before their 10th birthday. So they are within the standard age range of recent Knob Creek picks, but being barreled at 128 proof, I'm so excited to see what high proof Knob Creek, or higher proof Knob Creek, is like, should I say. So let's go and give this Magic a nose. Ah, yeah. Classic Knob Creek nose. I used to buy these all the time, especially when they were up there in age, from 10, 11, 12 years old. Since they went back down to the 9-year age statement, I've bought them occasionally, but not with as much vigor as I had bought before. Actually, I've been buying more the Knob Creek 12-year, just the standard 100 proof version, than I've been picking up Knob Creek picks. But now that we're seeing them at actual cask strength, I think that brings a little bit more of restored excitement for the releases. Pricing-wise, these come in at about $65, same price as the single barrel selects have been. But instead of being, filtered down to 120 proof, these are being bottled at cask strength, of course, non-chill filtered as well. Yeah, nothing too crazy on the nose. It definitely smells like a very well-aged, very, heavily oaked bourbon. That's what I love the most about Knob Creek. I always say they are like a saturated oak. It's like this oak has been drenched and sucking up this bourbon and spitting it out over and over again. That sounds weirdly sexual, but I just mean the Kentucky heat, especially at the higher parts of these rick houses. I mean, there is so much going on with that distillate in the wood, just, breathing each other. Okay, enough breathing this whiskey. It's time to give it a taste. Let's try this Knob Creek cask strength. Cheers. Oh, wow. Yes. Okay. I do think that there's a pretty good impact on the fact that this is higher proof than normal. I mean, it drinks hot, don't get me wrong, but you know what? sometimes I like a hot Knob Creek, and this is definitely, definitely a hot knob. I think that the flavor profile honestly kind of reminds me of some of the Bookers I've had, some of the ones that I really enjoyed, actually. It's coming off as like an older oak. It's not necessarily that like I said, the sappy kind of oak, like the saturated oak. To me, it's dry. It's a lot drier than a lot of Knob Creeks I've had. Maybe that's just because it's from the upper floors of the rick house. I mean, I think, Knob Creek in general tends to be a little bit of a sweeter bourbon, but with this being held high in the rick houses, it's going to take on way more of that oak characteristic because heat rises. Now, on second sip, I do find some of the more traditional sweetness that I love about Jim Beam flavor profile. It's not quite nutty, but I will say it's kind of a little bit in like the praline or praline, wherever you're from, however you pronounce it. A little bit of a burnt caramel kind of note. And I think that's because it's reading that way because the oak is so dry. It's coming across a little bit more of like, an overcooked kind of sweet versus like, sometimes I'll say like a light caramel or like a creamy caramel. This one's dark. This one's a bit bitter. But it's still really, really nice. But that being said, I don't think this carries with it the depth of some of those older picks that I've had in the past. I mean, of course, my brain instantly jumps to those like 14 and 15-year-old ones that quickly disappeared. And I don't want to hold everything to that standard because, again, those were several years ago. They've not come out since. But I do remember, even when we weren't quite that high in age, we were having some like 11, maybe 12-year-old picks of it that were just so good. I mean, even the Knob Creek 12, the 100 proof, like I said, it's like been a go-to on my bar. I think 12 years for a Knob Creek and 12 years for an Elijah Craig are the sweet spot for those whiskeys. Now, not every whiskey I feel that way about, but I feel like once I've tried those two at 12 year, not that I can't accept, them being younger. It's just they've kind of set a bar for themselves, and I keep expecting that bar to be at least met. So do I think that this 9-year cask strength single barrel select is as good as like a 12-year-old 100 proof Knob Creek? It really depends what you're looking for. For me, I do love the boldness of the flavor, the richness of the oak, and I do appreciate the proof boost we have here. It just feel like it's missing a little bit of the age that we got on those older picks. What I would love to see is they start releasing older barrels to be part of the single barrel select program, especially with the ability for them to be higher proof. Because again, these barrels, if they're sitting this high on the rick house, guess what? That proof is going to go up and up and up as the temperature, kind of pulls the water out of that bourbon. So, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw like 130 plus proof Knob Creek pick coming in at, 11, 12 years old. That's what I would be excited for. I think this is a step in the right direction. I love that they didn't change the price, but they just upped the proof as a possibility. That's really great. I'm very excited for that, but I still think with it being limited to a 9 to 10-year-old product, you're not getting to see where Knob Creek or Jim Beam in general as a distillery excels. They really do excel at that higher age statement, at least in my experience. I do think this is a step in the right direction. I just don't think that it's going to make me buy these as often as I used to, because there was a point where if I saw a Knob Creek single barrel pick, I'm buying a Knob Creek single barrel pick. But I'm definitely willing to keep a closer eye on it now, knowing that one, this one was close to 10 years old, so maybe they're starting to get a little bit more stock aged for these releases. But I'm also going to start looking at that proof because that makes a big difference. So yeah, it's a great pick, and I'm very happy to have bought it for $65. I just hope to kind of start seeing these go up in age, kind of like they used to be, even if they don't get the full 14, 15-year age that they used to be. I would love to see something closer to 12 years old, kind of like we see with Elijah Craig. So that does it for this week's episode. Let me know if you guys want to hear more gaming news like this scattered into the episode. I would love to talk about it more. I just don't know what level you guys are interested in. Of course, if anything comes up with like retro gaming or, arcades or 80s, things like that, I'm obviously going to mention them, which is kind of what inspired me with the Hideo Kojima story earlier, with it being, such an iconic founder in the world of video games. I had to talk about that. But if there's any topics you guys are interested in, let me know. Feel free to give me a call. Like I said, we have the new phones number set up if you guys want to leave me a message. So anytime you want to reach me, you can call me at 916-642-9837 or 916-64-BYTES. So yeah, leave me a message. I'm happy to answer it on next week's podcast or a future stream, or maybe just listen to it while I'm trying to fall asleep at night and enjoy hearing your voice. But with that, this has been the Bourbon Bytes podcast. Cheers, and I'll talk to you guys next episode.